the participation of our great friend Hugo López Araiza Vega, who will talk to us about the BRIC'S environment in Latin America. Well, this is a part of my bio. As you can see, my background has to do with the business world and also the engineering world, and I'm in touch with Japan. And I also like to travel a lot, and that's why I told my friend in Curaçao that there's an interesting bridge in Curaçao which moves a lot, and you have to go back because it's impossible to cross the bridge and you have to take a boat. It's an interesting bridge. Okay, today we'll talk a little about the BRIC'S environment in Latin America and the BRIC'S countries. The term BRIC'S was mentioned for the first time by Goldman Sachs in 2001 through O'Neill, and it has to do with the following. It includes countries such as Russia, South Africa, Brazil, which are right here. This is what the graphic shows. Let me explain. This is how countries are ranked. AAA are those who do not have a problem. We're talking about very stable countries. BA1 are the least stable countries. What we have here is the performance of each of these individual countries. The profits you will get if you invest in these countries. The lowest risk in the country, the better premiums you get. What did Goldman Sachs do? They asked themselves, what can I do to offer my profits to my investors? Well, I will encourage them to invest in these countries, which are the ones giving the highest profits, and they have a good stability. After 15 years, we have realized that we have problems in Russia, for example, however, or in Brazil, or in China, or in South Africa. So all of them have problems. In previous sessions, we asked ourselves, why are not we there? Well, we don't fit. If you notice, Mexico is an A3 country, and we're always working hard to go lower. And we're at the same level as Israel or South Korea. From a standpoint of risk and what we're paying in terms of premiums, even though we have low risk. And now we're talking about the mixed countries, which includes Mexico, South Korea. We're not including Indonesia or Turkey here, but the mixed countries are somewhere around here. So Goldman Sachs says, well, I'll urge my customers to invest in these countries. They won't pay that many dividends, but I will have fewer problems with my investors. And that's the origin of a mixed group. I would say that BRIC should stand for Best Recommended Investment Countries. Let's look at it. There's another firm known as iShares. We're talking about investment funds purchased by BlackRock. Here they have a classification, a different classification of countries. The green countries are developed countries, blue countries are emerging economies, and the black countries are border countries, and the white ones are not even countries. Not from an investment standpoint. What does this mean? If you notice, in these countries known as developed countries, they have 2 or more investment funds. In these developing countries, for example, like this in Latin America, we're talking about 1 or 2 investment funds. In the black countries, they don't have anything at all. And in the white countries, well, they're not even considered for these purposes. What does this mean in layman terms? These gentlemen suggest or invite their customers to invest here in developing countries with high levels of capitalization, right here. These countries are developing countries. However, we have Mexico, which has 2 investment funds, Brazil, 2 investment funds, And then we have China with 2 investment funds. India with only 1. And then, which is the other one? Brazil, China, India, South Africa. Yes, only 1. So, if you look at it, what this graph shows is that the countries where good premiums are paid are these. The black countries are the ones that are not attractive from an investment standpoint, and the white countries are those that do not even have an internal market with a stock exchange, which means that we don't have a place to invest safely. That's what the white countries mean. These are maturing, and that includes Argentina, which is kind of stumbling. And then we have the other countries on the other side of axis, Turkey, which has 1 investment fund. And that's what it means. Obviously, here you can see Australia and Japan. So that's what we can say, that these are the new BRIC'S countries, meaning countries where we can invest safely because they have a stock exchange, we can invest in it, and we know that we won't have any surprises. Let's look at the Mexican case, and I apologize for talking about Mexico because, but that's what I know best. This is in million pesos, starting in 2004. From 2004 to 2014, we have had a series of this period includes PA and government administrations, which some peaks, and then in 2008 here we have the global crisis, and then we kept on moving. What I like about this graph is this part that shows a little over 13 billion pesos versus 11 billion, which means that in 10 years we have grown by 20%. We have grown by 20%. And those who say that we haven't grown at all, that this has been horrible, no. We have grown by 20% because we're growing 3% annually. But that's the best we can do. Even if a new president says that we'll grow by 7% in our GDP, well, that's a lie because the presidents say the same. And the best we can do is 3% because 50% of our citizens are not productive. So that means that we have 50% poverty. That's why we cannot reach that 7%, only 3%. Now, what do we have here? For the 6th year in a row, we start our year with optimism, and 6 years later, then we go down. We begin by saying we'll grow by 7%, and then our predictions go down. Let's look at the expected growth. We have China with 7.14%, which is one of BRIC'S. We have the US, which is at around 2.6%. Even though Banorte predicts 1.6%, France 0.9%. If you look at the previous graph, look at France. They're the ones with the lowest rate of return. It's the one at the bottom. And here we understand and we see why. You can see that they have 0.9%. These countries are not growing. In the European region, you have low rates of return. We can get more in the US, more in Mexico, 1 point more. Brazil fell off. China is growing like crazy, and the UK and Japan are low. And the UK is the driving force of the Eurozone economy. They are the ones that are growing the most, even more than Germany. This is what we expect. This is what Banorte, a Mexican bank, predicts, with more moderate forecasts. The only ones that everybody agrees will grow is China, a lot. now. And then I said, well, if we're talking about India, let's look at India. Let's compare India versus Latin America. I began to add the results of all these countries: Colombia, Peru, Chile, Argentina, Venezuela, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Bolivia. And you can see the difference between India and all these countries. The Indian economy is the sum of all these countries that you see at the top, just for you to get an idea. The second comparison was that of population. Well, in all these countries, the GDP is this, with 204 million people. India can do the same with 152 million. That is, 1.2 billion people. But that also shows that the Indian economy is highly inefficient. If you look at the GDP per capita, you can realize, for example, that we have Chile, which is astoundingly good, with $15,000 a year per person, and the total wage result for all of them is 9,000, with a huge countries like Bolivia, where you have 2,000. But if you weigh everything, the average is 9,000. Compare that to India, which is at around 1,400, almost 50% compared to Bolivia. This means that there is a huge difference internally. There are high levels of poverty, a lot of poor people compared to wealthy people. So this GDP, apparently good, apparently huge, is not that huge when you look at the truth. If you consider the GDP per capita, which means that they have huge poverty levels. This is what it shows. Then we have territory. The Indian territory is 1.5 times that of Mexico. And if you compare it against all these group of countries, Latin American countries, you will find that it's a little less than 50%. And the number of people per square kilometer in India are 38 inhabitants per square kilometer, and in Latin America we have 2.32, which means that we're only inhabited, we don't have enough people. This number is really important. I mean, if we have 2.2 persons per square kilometers in these countries on average, building a road would be really expensive, because we will end up into uninhabited towns. I don't have the figures for Japan, but Japan has a dense population level, and therefore a road, bullet train is financially feasible, because it can communicate to population towns or cities full of people, and you will be able to amortize that investment pretty fast. That's not the case here. It should happen in India. However, that doesn't happen either, because of the high levels of poverty, which prevent those investments from happening. I'll get into the details of that later. Let's look at Brazil. I didn't want to include Brazil in these numbers because Brazil is better than us. They have 200 million inhabitants, but look at their GDP per capita, which is similar to that of Argentina or Chile. It's pretty good. Brazil is really good, even though they sometimes have internal problems. Their territory is huge, more than 2 times that of India. But they also have a big problem, the same problem in Latin American countries. It's a huge territory, virtually unpopulated. Therefore, infrastructure from the standpoint of roads, etc., is very poor. It's difficult to amortize it. In the case of Brazil, the most successful area is that of Sao Paulo and Rio de South. In India, the most successful region is in the center. I want to get into the details, because otherwise the doctor won't be able to say much. And then I said, let's compare that to Mexico and look at the interesting results. Mexico City has 4.7 GDP. The GDP for Mexico City is $4.7 billion, which is similar to the economy of Argentina. Mexico City is virtually similar from an economic standpoint. We have a population of 8 million people. And here, for example, we have Paraguay or Bolivia as a country. It's equivalent. And then the GDP is $53,000 per capita for Mexico City, which is far above all this, and it's equivalent of Canada. So you don't have to go to Canada unless you want to travel to Canada for tourism. You have an idea of what Canada is, and you can have an idea if you just travel to Mexico City. The territory is very small, 1 point something. This is nothing. 1,495 square kilometers, which leads to a high level of population density, and that's already inhabitants per square kilometers. We have in Mexico City metro bus, we have a subway system, we have roads, toll roads, we have everything. Why? Because it's cheap. If I build a subway line, I can move a lot of people. They say that the Mexico City subway transports more than 3 million people, which is equivalent of a full country. We could move all the inhabitants in Uruguay in the Mexico City subway in a single day. And then I went to Monterrey, which is the second largest economy in the country. You can see the difference, 1.3, that's their GDP. Their population is 4 million inhabitants, which is half of Mexico City. But the GDP per capita drops to $31,000 per person. We have a territory that is larger than that in Mexico City, and therefore the population density is lower. If you go to Monterrey, you'll see that the infrastructure is not as developed as that in Mexico City for obvious reasons, because it cannot be amortized that easily. And the next is Guadalajara, which is half the size of Monterrey from a GDP standpoint. However, we have the same number of people. The GDP per capita is cut by half, and it's a lot larger from a territory standpoint. And again, we see 50% of the number of inhabitants per square kilometers. And the GDP, if you consider these three economies, is still higher or larger than that of all this group of countries. I'm talking about the GDP of these three cities. The population in total is 17 million people, which is the equivalent of Chile. But you can see here how our GDP is virtually 3 times as much. And this is the GDP per person in this group of 3 cities. And here we see the number of people. Let's compare Mexico versus Mexico. Let's compare these 3 cities versus the rest of Mexico. In Mexico, we have 11.7, which is 2/3 of what India has. The population is 122 million in the full country, which is 1/10 of India. The GDP per capita is $9,000 per person. If we compare it against India, we're 9 times better off, and the territory is almost 2/3 of India. And here we can see that we don't have such a high population density, even though we're one of the most populated countries in Latin America. Ecuador is kind of similar, but we're one of the most populated. But what happens if we remove these 3 cities from the full number? We would go down to 5. The GDP would be $5 billion a year, which means that we would be the equivalent of Argentina if we didn't consider these 3 Mexican cities. But that would leave us with 104 million people outside of these cities, even though Argentina has only 41. So we will be twice as large as Argentina population-wise. The GDP would drop to 4,000, which is equivalent of Paraguay, if you will. The difference between Mexico and Paraguay is that here we have not legalized marijuana. They have legalized marijuana there. The territory continues to be very large, and once again, we're the equivalent of some of these countries. These are the figures in a nutshell. When I shared this in the previous meeting, I shared it with Raimundo and Mauricio. Raimundo told me, but there's no way out of that. There is no solution to that. You may remember that last year I read the parable of the dishonest manager, where Jesus told the administrator, "You're wrong," and the administrator said, "I will distribute among these people that are owed 30 oil barrels the oil." But what happened is that this administrator was making a lot of money. And we also have a paradox of Don Gaston Billetes, which is a character created by Don Abel Quesada, a cartoonist. He was driving along Paseo La Reforma with his chauffeur, and then he found that somebody came out to clean his windshield, and he picked 2 pesos from his wallet and gave it to somebody in the street. Then he runs into a newspaper boy, salesperson, and then he found a protest with this banner: 200 million buyers are on strike, on a purchasing strike until we are paid exactly what we sold. And he asked himself, what's the problem here? There was a lot of traffic. He ended up in his luxury office. He had this exclusive elevator, but he's late. He doesn't have a chance to get his private lift. He gets into this elevator, and he hears this comment among his employees saying that they don't have enough money, they're not well paid. Then he calls his accountant, Mr. Being counter, and he says his accountant, "Look, starting today, all my employees should get paid twice as much." So the accountant gets angry, and he says, "Doesn't he see we're in the middle of a crisis? If you pay them twice as much, we'll have to raise our prices, and we want to sell our products, and we'll get into an even worse crisis." And the boss says, "Hold on, nobody told you to raise the prices. I just told you to raise salaries, duplicate them, double them." And this accountant says, "What? Well, the boss is crazy. If we increase our costs, but we don't increase our prices, we will have less profits, and that's not good for you. How could you be thinking about that? What happened to you?" And this accountant is losing it. He doesn't understand. And then Gaston Billetes says, "Look, you don't understand a thing. We will double the salaries, but do you believe that those employees with the current salary can buy my cell phones, the ones I sell? Can they eat at my restaurants? No. Can they smoke the cigarettes we produce? No. If I raise their salary, they will be able to buy more cell phones, they will be able to eat at my restaurants, they will have more vices, it will be a lot better. And you'll see how, over time, things will improve, our economy will improve. That's the path towards wisdom, and that's the answer to your question. What can we do to get out of this problem? By increasing salaries, reducing our profits apparently, but over the long run, we'll get a lot more. Now, let's give you an overview of India. Why India? Why did we choose India on this occasion? The Indians say India is like an elephant, difficult to move and impossible to stop. Once it starts moving, nobody will be able to stop India, and that's what we're doing right now. And some people may talk about China. Hey, let this elephant India to keep on moving, and we'll see who can stop it. What happens with India? the Indian development is based on its huge internal market, which is not the case of market. China has based in its development on the external market. In 2000, I went to Japan and I took a specialization course, and I was there together with a business entrepreneur owning a company called Mahindra. Have you heard about it? Me neither. And I asked him, what do you do? And he said, we build tractors for the farming industry. And they're very famous in India. And what are your plans? And he said, we'll be the largest company building tractors or manufacturing tractors, even larger than John Deere. I said, because you see John Deere all over the world. He said, they will vanish once we become the largest. And what will you do? Will you export? No, he said, I will simply supply or meet the needs of the Indian market. Just look at that. Look at the mentality of Indian people. I will simply meet the demand in the Indian market. And you may be saying, hey, I've never heard of Mahindra. Well, there's another company known as Tata, which is an automotive company. Has anybody heard about Tata? There's this Tata company that sells cars. Well, have you heard about Jaguar? Guess who's the owner of Jaguar? Tata. They're actually a family? Yes, like Mitsubishi or all these large Japanese families. It's a huge conglomerate. That's Tata. They own Jaguar. What happens? First, they developed their domestic market, and that's what they did before they bought Jaguar, just to give you an idea. They account for 1/6 of the world population. You want a larger market? They have enough domestically. What's the problem they face? They still lack a lot of development and infrastructure. The last time I traveled to India, that was about 8 years ago, and I traveled with my wife. I know what the situation is now, but at the time they had 400 kilometers of roads, highways only. They only had 400 kilometers of highways. In Mexico, in the last government administration, they built 3,000 kilometers of roads. 400 kilometers is nothing. And they're simply communicating New Delhi with Agra and Jaipur. This small golden triangle. Yes, they're highways. They have a great train system that communicates all the Indian people, inherited from the British, which works great, but they're not very good when it comes to infrastructure like this. They still lack some development. I don't know if you remember these graphs I show you that explain the benefit of building infrastructure and the cost of it. Gas is really expensive. Okay, you'll talk about that. But this is just to give you an idea of what India is all about. And I hope you have liked my presentation, and I hope that you have a lot of expectations, and to welcome the doctor, who is the next speaker. Perdón por tanta interrupción, compañero.
We would like to thank Hugo López Araiza Vega for his participation, his very interesting presentation about the BRIC'S environment in Latin America. And now I would like to invite accountant Luis Manuel so that he can introduce to us the next presenter. Good morning to all of you partners. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Alfonso Romo, who is just going to give us an official welcome and his opening remarks. He will give us a conference later on today. But Alfonso Romo Garza Lagüera is a wonderful entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and he is also the president of Fundación Educar Uno. Let me tell you a little bit about that, because his work as an entrepreneur is amazing, but being an agent of change is even more important. Educar Uno and this program was born with the intention of driving children and young people through the use of just 4 words: feel, imagine, do, and share. To me, he's a friend, he's a teacher and mentor as well, and I want to thank him for spending this time with us. Alfonso Romo, thank you so much for being here, for giving us the official opening remarks for our conference. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Manuel, and to everybody else here, to all of our guests for receiving us here in Mexico City this September 22nd, 2014 at 10:30. I declare the 15th Annual Partners Conference of UC&CS America and UC&CS Global officially inaugurated. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Romo Garza, for your kind intervention. And now we would like to No, I'm sorry. I think I misread the agenda. We will now go take the group picture right outside the hotel, the official photograph of the conference. Then we will have a coffee break before coming back to listen to Dr. Banerjee's conference.